No signatures in Fulton County, Georgia. That's according to testimony from Mark Wingate during the disbarment proceedings involving Jeffrey Clark that were taking place earlier. And we're going to go through some of what Mr. Wingate had to say, because apparently he was on a board, was sending a bunch of emails and notices trying to get evidence about what was being conducted by the Board of Elections where he was serving. And he was told they didn't do any signature verification. In fact, the signature verification mechanism itself was not functional. Who is this guy? Mark Wingate. You see here is the person who was testifying during the Jeffrey Clark disbarment proceedings. And I found some documents and some email exchanges between him and some other people that we need to know a little bit about before we get into the proceeding itself. This is what we see from the Board of Elections. Now, I have served on a board very much like this, and this feels familiar to me, but I wanted to share how this works. Essentially, you're going to see this guy who's testifying is Mr. Mark Wingate, Republican Party appointee, nominated by the full board. His term ends 6/30/2021. Now, he's part of a panel of 5 total people. Okay, 4 other people here on the board with him. They make up a forum and they vote on certain issues, right? So he is there. Now, he's a Republican appointee. You see, you have a Democrat Party appointee, a Democrat Party appointee, another Republican. So 2 Dems, 2 Republicans, and a chairman. So he's involved back during 2020. And you see the person who is really running this, and the way that this works is you have these like permanent government liaisons. This guy, Richard L. Barron. His name's going to come up here in a minute. He's the director of registration and elections, which is this entity that meets. His email is here. And there's these other people, these chairs of the Republican Party, chair of the Democrat Party, Kelly and Pines. So that's what this guy was involved in. And he was in office back during the 2020 election. And this is an election board that merges the functions of registration and elections, and it does a bunch of stuff. So he's on the board. Now, that is some foundation. What is he involved in? This is some of the emails that I was able to capture just from one simple exchange. This is an email on Sunday, November 29, 2020. It's from Richard Barron. Remember him? He was the director of the Election and Registration Board. He wrote right after the election, November 29th, this is a copy from an email that we're going to see Mr. Wingate is responding to. Richard wrote, "We still don't know if Dominion can retrieve the files on the failed server." The tech that's been with us through the recount was unable to fix it because it's outside his area of expertise. Dominion is sending someone in the morning to work on it. If the new tech can't fix the server, then we'll have to rescan early voting, absentee, and provisional ballots. All right, so this is just one evidence of kind of what this guy, Mark Wingate, was talking about. So we got Wingate responds. He says, "Good Lord, so operations are ceased for now?" He responds, sends that one back to Richard Barron. Barron responds. He says, "Well, we were only scheduled 8 to 5 today, and we have until midnight on Wednesday to complete this. So, if you buy a computer at a store and it fails, you get a refund or a new one, or they fix it. That is what we're dealing with." He says, "People that are freaking about this are so off the rails. I'm ignoring the noise. Computers fail. We can start over. It's not ideal, but it's the reality that we face." Wasn't this supposed to be like a perfect election where everything was perfect? So then Barron got a message. So Mark Wingate responded. He said, "Who's making a ruckus out there? Who's making the noise?" Richard, the head of elections, sends, "I heard that David Schaefer is tweeting up a storm. External Affairs is fielding lots of calls because of all of his tweets." David Schaefer? Who's that? Oh, yeah. The guy they charged with a crime in Fannie's case. He's saying there's a bunch of problems with our election. So then Mark Wingate comes out, says, "I will get a message out." Okay, so, hey, we're working on this. We're going to reconstitute the drives, whatever. Mark Wingate on the elections board says, "Okay, I'm going to get a message out." We continue, and Richard responds back to Mark. He says, "I'd appreciate it. Thanks for getting the message out. I alerted the state earlier today, too, when it happened, when the computer broke." Mark sends a message the next morning. right? Bright and early. So 6:31, November 30th, after November 29th, 9:09, Mark Wingate sends a message back over to Richard. He says, "Hey, Richard, good morning. Kindly let us know where you are at on the server and data issue so we are not behind the 8 ball." You talk about like servers doing things again, rescanning stuff, reconstituting stuff. Let me fix this. Let me have another technician doing this. Okay, that is all outside of the norm, right? You have protocols that you follow so that you don't taint anything, right? Like in a DUI case, you have very specific procedures that you follow. And if the machine has an error for whatever reason, you have to stop everything, okay? And you have to pull that machine out of service, do a root cause analysis to what happened with that machine before you can ever put it back into service. And it's like a huge nightmare, which is why crime labs hate doing it and they flub everything. But the point is, when there is a major problem, it causes concern, because if the machine has a problem, if the chain of custody is invalid, if there's some problem with the mechanics, it could jeopardize the entire sample, right? It's like, you don't break the seal until it gets to your house, then you break the seal. But if somebody else, if your delivery driver breaks the seal and then seals it back up and gives it to you, you don't eat that anymore. So if we already have mechanisms that were already in place, and now we have backup servers and dudes from California flying out and having to do it all over again, that introduces possibility for error or manipulation or for rigging, obviously. So here is what Mark says back. He says, "Okay, good morning. Kindly let us know where you're at on the server data issue so we're not behind the 8 ball. Here's a question I have. Why did we operate in this single point of failure environment and not have a ready backup server?" Good question, Mark. I'm not taking a shot, rather trying to get ahead of a logical question. Response from Richard says from his iPhone, "We have another server. The project package files crashed with the server. We never had a second server as a backup until now. We bought this for LNA, probably logic and accuracy, and it can be used for the recount. It gives us the ability to operate remotely. It saves us multiple trips per day to the warehouse from the GWCC. The computer was 4 days old and it broke. A technician is flying from California. Maybe it was Hunter Biden's, bro. He arrives at 5. We're going to forward from scratch, operating as though he won't be able to fix it. Won't be able to fix it." Interesting, right? Perfect election. That was, no one had any reason to investigate. And if you tweeted about it like David Schaefer did, you got prosecuted. So here it continues. He messages Rick, "Please have Jessica get an email out ASAP before the media starts their own stories." Rick says she issued a statement last night that she sent to everyone. And of course, that's just a snapshot of some of the emails, okay? So that's the guy. His name's Mark Wingate, and he was testifying, explaining there are a lot of problems with the election that was taking place there in Georgia. And this was clipped by Kaneko the Great. I know many other people have done some good work on this, including Molly Hemingway and others that were investigating all the problems in Georgia. But here is just a bit of testimony. We'll play through it, and I'll try to let it go with minimal reaction and interruption.
To have concern about everything was much, much earlier in 2020. And I can't remember exactly when I began. I started looking at our voter rolls. And, I did fairly simplistic research on the population of Fulton County, Georgia. And what I found out, and of course started pressing that with the elections department, through subsequent monthly meetings, etc., was that the numbers that I was able to ascertain, we had more voters on the active voter rolls than we did of the population of the entirety of Fulton County, and then extrapolating for those of voting age.
More voters.
So that became a major concern of mine, and frankly, lasted throughout and continued even after
more voter registrations than voters.
2020 election. So that was a big issue. And of course, inside that 2020 time frame, really there was nothing done wasn't time, and I understand all of that, but there was nothing done to answer my questions on that. And well, look, it's only fair to the voters of Fulton County that, we're having clean voter rolls here so that nobody's vote, is disparaged because, somebody may have come in and voted that frankly, legally should not be able to.
Weird.
So I think that's very, very important for the Fulton County or anywhere in the country.
And we should investigate that.
From that,
which was Trump is exactly what Trump was doing.
In the 2020 election itself, I had and other board members had requested that we obtain the chain of custody documentation from the department. And none of that was ever delivered. It was not delivered at the time of request leading up to the election, and was certainly not given nothing, even leading up to the certification.
Let me interrupt you right there, Mr. Wingate, and ask you to explain for the committee what you mean by about chain of custody documents.
Okay. The election staff, we had many components in many areas where absentee by mail ballots were being delivered to and then picked up and then centralized to, the processing center. And then, of course, there's documentation so that whoever is handing those envelopes, in that case, off to, then it's there to sign off that they've delivered to this person and, the transportation or transport of those documents, which goes on daily. Then once they are delivered to the location that they're destined to, there is another signature required on a document that shows that, where it was picked up, driven to, delivered to, and then signed off on as received.
And it's a physical document.
This is going on for multiple locations daily. And, in terms of the memory cards that are being delivered so that they can be kept, in security, there's the same level chain of custody documentation that is delivered for all of the memory cards coming in from early voting locations and, of course, on election day from each of the precincts.
A gave it to B, B gave it to C, C gave it to D,
that's
and
fundamentally
so on.
what that encompasses.
Just like
that's
evidence.
Great. Thank you very much.
Law.
I interrupted you to get that, so pick back up where you were talking about asking for and not receiving a chain of custody documents.
Very basic
paperwork.
Well,
that, since we asked and did not receive any of it, that to me is just one reason. Well, how can I trust?
You can't.
As a board member to certify this election when I cannot receive even a sampling, anything at all with regards to chain of custody documents.
You can't. Think about a DUI case, okay? If they pull you over and draw your blood, they track those 2 vials everywhere they go, okay? Officer so-and-so withdrew it. They gave it to some other officer who impounded it. It goes into evidence. Boom, it's all logged. Date, time, log. Person comes out to do the sample analysis. The crime lab techs, they come, they pull it out of evidence, they mark it down. It's all logged, right? If you end up in a DUI case and they say, hey, we got your DUI result, it's a 0.25, you go, what? Where'd that blood sample come from? They say, well, doesn't matter. Here it is. This is your result. You say, well, I want to know how you tested it. Where'd it come from? Well, this person tested it. Here's the person, John Doe tested it. Here you go. Here's your result. What? I don't care who tested it. Where did he get the sample that he tested from? And the person who put it into evidence, what did they do with it before they put it into evidence? Did they rewrite the vial on someone else's blood or whatever? Like, I need to know from the moment it left my body to the moment it entered the crime lab's, analysis, who possessed it and where did it go? And if you don't have that, right, that blood sample is invalid. The courts will say that. They'll say, no, I don't know. Let's say the officer who withdrew the blood, right, is no longer with us or retires. Or I had a case where I got a blood sample dismissed where the officer who transported the blood had retired, essentially, okay, was no longer around, left the state of Arizona. Nobody knows where this guy was. So phlebotomy, the blood draw was happening on the side of the road. They gave it to this other cop. He drove it to the evidence lab, impounded it. That guy was gone. So my argument was, I don't know what he did to the sample when he was driving around in his car, and nobody can ask him about this. So he's gone. Blood sample was invalid, has to go, because it's a broken chain of custody. It's very, very important. And they're not even giving them to the election board. That is a problem. In my opinion, that should invalidate whatever number they show you to your face, because you can't backtrace it to where it came from. Just like in criminal law, it's not even complicated. And elections should be held to a much higher standard than currently, which is rigged. They should not be rigged. They should be held, I would say, beyond a reasonable doubt. Shouldn't we have faith in our elections beyond a reasonable doubt?
So that was just another one of the things in my mind leading up to certification that was something that, certainly was not fulfilled. There was also, for that election, the advent of this whole Dropbox circumstance, was unveiled. And then I think Fulton County, we had like 36 or so drop boxes located around the county. And these drop boxes at that particular point were set outside of an early voting location, which means that, they're in the elements, they're 24 hours a day, but there were surveillance cameras as required that supposedly, were operating 24/7 so that they could be monitored, and anybody tried to do any damage or anything nefarious to any of those locations, that could be looked at and, hopefully somebody sent out there to secure the situation. But we'd ask for not every surveillance tape, but ask to see surveillance tapes, whatever, just give us some samplings of that so we can take a look at it, because I knew that this was going to be an important issue because of all the hullabaloo that any of us that were alive in those days, was witnessing as being an issue. And from that request, again, to the way in which it turned out, there was never one surveillance tape, an inch of footage that was ever delivered to the board.
Why not?
And if it was delivered to anybody, it certainly was not any board member that I was aware of or made me aware of. So
What
that
are you
was
even doing on the board?
was another issue.
Just a placeholder.
The other issue we had down here was this whole questioning of ballots underneath a table and then being pulled out on election night, State Farm Arena. Well,
where the water main break happened.
On television, by the way, we did see that surveillance tape. And of course, I, as a board member and knowing most all of those people who were in that room that night, I didn't make any judgment as to what was going on. I had no basis to do that, but I did see it. And of course, I asked the questions of our director, and this was, I believe, the day following election day. And, his response was, well, he just hasn't had time to look into this.
Yeah,
but he will and get back to us.
Of course.
Well, there was nothing ever gotten back to, at least to me as a board member,
just delay it long enough,
that had any explanation of that election night at State Farm Arena. And we got to certification, and there was still no response to that. Did not know, still being investigated exactly. Well, I think the director, in my opinion, and still believe that to this day, could have, stated, look, I've talked to everybody, and this is what transpired. I firmly believe that should have been done by the then director, but it was not. And the last thing that prevented me from certifying was we had such a huge number of absentee by mail ballots. And those ballots, we as the department and the board, and then the board of commissioners who has to approve, certain expenditures, because it was becoming very, very clear that there was going to be a larger amount of absentee by mail ballots this election year by far than in previous years. So they determined a system that is called Bluecrest.
Okay.
And the Bluecrest platform primarily was an absentee by mail or a paper ballot processing application. And that would
software
scan
ballots
in the outer oath envelopes. It would open them. It would then pull them out. It would flatten them, as they call it, and then put them in bundles for later processing and scanning. Part of that, or one of the applications or elements of that Bluecrest platform, was an electronic signature verification component.
Important.
And of course, as that was reported, we all thought that was going to be up and running, and how exactly that the department and the people there for managing the absentee by mail ballot processing would have a very fine function in the electronic signature verification component. Well, as I recall, I believe that time frame was in October, at the board meeting for October.
Right before the election.
I had asked the question, where are we with regards to the functionality of the electronic signature verification component? And I was told that the technicians from Bluecrest were in our building that day,
working hard,
and that they were working to functionalize the electronic signature verification component.
When you say functionality and functionalize, what's the plain English meaning of that?
In October.
Meaning getting it to work.
In October.
Thank you.
If that makes sense. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Right now. Like in the
they
building.
were in there to make the thing work.
Okay.
And, we certainly, board meeting concluded, we went on, but after the fact, we're not hold in between that October date. And then, of course, about a month later, the election itself, at least I was not told that they did not get it to work. So, somewhere along the line, I am sorry, I can't remember exactly when it was, but I had asked the question, well, okay, what did we do for signature verification? And the comment I got back was, which frankly at that time floored me, was, well, we didn't do any. And I remember I forget where I was, I was on a phone call, I forget exactly, and I apologize, it's been so long.
Yeah,
but
didn't do it.
I do remember that comment that, we didn't do any. Now,
clearly,
of course, I took that saying, all right, well, by law, you've got to do signature verification. You've got to at least have somebody looking at this. And one side of that is that whomever you have that is looking at is supposed to be, verifying signature, that if there is no signature on the oath envelope, then how are you curing that, or what are you doing with it? And I remember going down, on from that and said, well, there weren't many, so we just sent them back out, and if they reply on time, then they'll get their vote counted. And I thought that was a little weak, but anyway, as I recall, that's what I was told.
Wild. So they rejected some of the signatures. There's some of them, not many of them, but like if it's like clearly somebody looked at them and we just sent them back out, and if they cured it, then it's a couple hundred people, not a big deal, whatever. So it's just lowest common denominator bureaucracy garbage, right? It's either intentionally opening up a door so that there can be rigging, or it's allowing the incompetence to just just enable it of itself, right? It is so incompetent that you don't even need to do anything very complicated. You got to get, the vote margin in Georgia was like 11,000, 12,000 votes, very small. And if there's no signatures being checked and they have computer servers failing and there's no real accountability to chain of custody about where the votes are coming from or how they're getting tallied, it is total insanity. And this mirrors, by the way, all of the opinions that we saw from the Obama appointed judge, who I believe was Totenberg, who made the same argument that the elections in Georgia are so problematic, it's almost like a joke. It's almost like just, good enough. It's good enough. We looked at some things and it's good enough for everybody and they just pass it on. It's like just passing kids up the grades.
Those are primarily, ladies and gentlemen, in my mind and in my reasoning, why I was not comfortable, in certifying.
All right, sir. And what was the vote on certification? What was the vote total on certification when the board voted?
Well, there were two in the board, there's two Republicans, two Democrats, and then supposedly, which doesn't always work that way, an independent or a nonpartisan chair. The vote was 3 to certify and 2 against.
And that was for both certification votes?
That's yes.
All right. And do you have an understanding of how much the Blue Crest system cost the county?
To do the signature verification, to open up all the things?
And again, I can't be precise, but it seems to me like the entire platform was a little over $1 million.
Nice. Doesn't work at all.
And to your knowledge, did they ever get it working?
To my knowledge, no. It obviously did not work leading up to and going through any of the 2020 elections. And I don't believe it was working either, for the runoffs that we had coming out of 2020 elections.
Did they ever get it working in a later election while you were on the board?
To my knowledge, no. I'm sorry. We had asked a couple of times and had gotten a response that no, but there was no pressure on them after the 2020 election and runoffs to do that.
Do you recall approximately how many absentee ballots were counted in Fulton County in the November 2020 presidential election?
Yeah, it was, I think, a few more than 147,000.
147,000 not signature checked ballots. Boom. Wow. Okay, so it is just shocking to hear the level of incompetence, if not just outright corruption. Everybody just passes the buck. That's close enough. We did some signature ballots. Chain of custody, we'll get those documents to you. Everybody just keeps kicking the can down the road. You just have to wait long enough until January 6th happens, and then everything kind of gets deviated from there. All of the election trials, all of the election challenges evaporated overnight. After January 6th, everybody moved on. You couldn't even talk about the election anymore, right? It was all insurrection fever. And so they just had to get it right past the finish line. They shoved Joe Biden in the White House, and then who cares what happens, right? They start prosecuting Trump, and the steal has been completed. But really shocking to hear it from Mark Wingate. And I know there's a lot of digging that's been done on this, so this is just scratching the surface. Molly Hemingway wrote a whole book about it. And so we're going to be here continuing to cover it, my friends. Thank you for joining us as we do. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking this video, inviting a friend or family member to come over here and join us so they don't miss out on what they're doing behind the scenes in our government. We got some great links down in the description. Would love to see you over on our locals community, watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We do streams in the morning. We talk about other stuff that we don't have the time to get into here, and a lot of fun stuff like gardening. So come join us, watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We'll see you over there and right back here on the next one.